There have been many dynasties in Chinese history, but do you know how these dynasties fell? Were there any signs before their fall? And what crazy or unusual events happened before they collapsed? In this video, we will look at what happened before all these dynasties fell. The first dynasty, the Xia dynasty. Since this is the first dynasty, so there are definitely very few historical records about it. Even so, the Guanzi, weighing and balancing economic factors, mentions a crazy event during the reign of Jie, the last monarch of the Xia. He kept 30,000 female musicians and dancers who performed songs and dances for him from morning to night, and the music spread from the palace to the streets. So what does having 30,000 female musicians mean? The population at the end of the Xia dynasty is established to be around 4 million, so 30,000 musicians accounted for 0.75% of the population. Comparing this to today's China with a population of 1.4 billion, that's equivalent to 10.5 million people working in the music and dance industry, but serving only one person. In that era of low agricultural productivity, having nearly 1% of the population not engaged in production and solely serving the monarch meant that the common people had to provide a large amount of food and fabric to the royal family to support these 30,000 people. The Chronicle of Emperors also mentions that Jie had a favorite concubine named Meixi. He spent his days drinking and watching song and dance performance with Meixi. Meixi had a very odd hobby. She liked the sound of silk being torn. So Jie had people collect a lot of silk and tear it up for her to listen to. Jie also gathered wine into a large pool and invited the nobles to drink with him. Many people got drunk and fell into the pool. Additionally, Guanzi, weighing and balancing economic factors, mentions that Jie did not allow people to build bridges over rivers in winter, nor did he allow them to use rafts in rivers during summer. Here, you can pause the video for 5 seconds to guess why, but I bet you will never guess the reason. The answer is revealed. He did it just to enjoy watching the people suffer from the cold and struggle with flooding. The most shocking thing is that Jie was the first director of prank videos on social media in Chinese history. He actually had tigers released onto the streets and watched from a distance, laughing loudly as people panicked and ran in all directions. Thus, this pleasure-seeking and exploitative monarch was not only unpopular, but he also failed to manage the various crises of his dynasty. Eventually, internal divisions among the Xia nobility arose, and after years of warfare with other tribes, the Xia were overthrown by the Shang tribe. The second dynasty in China was the Shang dynasty. Its last ruler, King Zhou, was similar to Jie, enjoying wine and beauties, leading a luxurious life. He spent a great deal of manpower and resources to build a huge palace for himself called the Deer Terrace. Next to it, he dug a large pond filled with wine known as the wine pool, and hung meat from the trees around it known as the meat forest. He spent his days there drinking and reveling with his concubine Daji. However, his extravagant lifestyle did make some contributions to Chinese culture. It contributed the idiom wine pools and meat forests to describe a life of luxury and indulgence. In addition to loving life like Jie, King Zhou was also very interested in human anatomy. When Bi Gan, one of King Zhou's ministers, saw that King Zhou was engrossed in pleasure and neglected state affairs, he advised him to change his ways. King Zhou responded, "Do you want to be a sage? I heard that a sage's heart has 7 openings. Let me see if yours does too." He then ordered Bi Gan's heart to be cut out. Once in the winter, King Zhou and Daji saw an old man hesitating to cross a river while a child had already crossed easily. Daji found it strange. King Zhou explained that the old man's bone marrow was insufficient, so he felt the river water was piercingly cold during winter. The child's marrow was full, so he was not afraid of the cold. Daji did not believe it, so King Zhou had the old man and the child captured and their legs cut off on the spot to show Daji the marrow. Besides, King Zhou and Daji also invented a punishment called Pao Luo, which simply involved tying people to a red-hot copper column and roasting them alive. He also killed Bo Yikao, the eldest son of the Marquess of the West, Ji Chang, chopped him into mincemeat, made a pie out of it, and fed it to Ji Chang. King Zhou's extreme and brutal actions eventually angered everybody. After Ji Chang's son, King Wu of Zhou, ascended to the throne of Zhou tribe, he led his troops to attack King Zhou, who organized a large army mainly composed of slaves to fight against the Zhou forces at Muye. However, these slaves also deeply resented King Zhou's greed and brutality. They all rebelled and joined the Zhou army. Thus, King Zhou contributed another idiom to Chinese civilization, turning the dagger axe around, which describes using a weapon to attack one's own side, helping the enemy. After his disastrous defeat at Muye, King Zhou fled back to his capital, Zhaoge, and burned himself to death at the Deer Terrace, ending his absurd and wicked life. The fall of the Shang dynasty, seemingly solely due to King Zhou, was actually the result of significant conflicts between the slave owners, ruling class, and slaves, ruled class, as well as internal conflicts within the ruling class. As the leader of the ruling class, King Zhou not only failed to resolve these conflicts, but exacerbated them, ultimately watching his dynasty crumble. The dynasty that followed the Shang was the Zhou dynasty. The early period of the Zhou is known as the Western Zhou, and its last ruler, King Yu of Zhou, was also fond of women. King Yu had a favorite concubine named Bao Si, who was usually aloof and never smiled. He tried every possible way to make Bao Si smile, but nothing could cheer her up. So he devised a super prank that affected at least hundreds of thousands of people. He ordered the lighting of the beacon towers, summoning the lords from all regions to the capital to rescue him. The lords, seeing the beacons, thought that King Yu and the capital were under attack and rushed there with their armies, only to find that nothing had happened and were very confused. Bao Si finally laughed upon seeing these deceived lords. If I were Bao Si, I definitely wouldn't be able to laugh at this moment, because misusing the beacon towers to play a prank on the regional lords, making them expend a lot of manpower and resources to lead their armies on a long journey to the capital, is not a funny prank at all. But I would also have to force myself to laugh, because if I didn't, who knows what more crazy things King Yu of Zhou might do. King You's fate was certainly tragic. He initiated a foreign war that ended in failure. He was also at odds with the regional lords, and one of them allied with barbarian tribes to defeat his army and kill him, leading to the fall of the Western Zhou. The Eastern Zhou was unlike the previous dynasties, which had a particularly foolish last monarch who made very stupid mistakes, leading to a very undignified end for his dynasty. The peculiarity of the Eastern Zhou lies in its very long decline, which began from the day it was established. After the death of King You of Zhou, his former crown prince succeeded to the throne. With the help of several regional lords, he moved the capital eastwards to Luoyi. Thus it was called the Eastern Zhou. Due to the great weakening of the Zhou royal house, its control over the regional lords was far less than during the Western Zhou. Over the centuries, these regional lords, originally infected by the king of Zhou, gradually eroded the king's power and expanded their own territories. It's like when you start raising a few kittens that are all obedient, quietly waiting for you to feed them every day. But when they grow up, you suddenly find that they can replenish their own cat food. They don't sleep in their beds but prefer to sleep on your bed, even pushing you out. They show little respect for you usually. The cats often fight over food and territory. Eventually, as the owner, you face the sad truth: you can't beat your cats. This chaotic period lasted nearly 500 years and is more famously known in history as the Spring and Autumn and the Warring States period. The Zhou royal family was also overthrown in 249 BC by the powerful state of Qin. After the Zhou dynasty came the Qin dynasty, which is perhaps the most heard about. I've made a series on how Qin unified the 6 states to establish a centralized monarchy, which you might find interesting to check out. If we compare which dynasty fell the fastest among the earlier dynasties, the Qin dynasty undoubtedly takes the crown, as it ended after just 2 emperors. Its rapid fall suggests it must have done something right in this race of decline to win the championship. Let me give you an analogy to make it clear. The Qin dynasty was like a malignant tumor, growing uncontrollably and wildly on its own. However, when it could no longer grow, it faced collapse. If you know a bit about the history of Qin, you'll realize that Qin became powerful after the reforms of Shangyang. Its strength was driven by Qin's laws, which allowed citizens to exchange enemy heads for titles and land. This motivated all citizens to enlist in the army, fight, and plunder. At the same time, Qin had very strict laws to regulate the behavior of its citizens, ensuring that their actions served the state's interests. However, when there were no more states to conquer, and Qin had nothing left to reward its citizens, especially the younger ones, the people were still required to labor under harsh laws for the state or the emperor's personal interests. With great sacrifices yielding no substantial rewards, the empire eventually could no longer sustain itself. So this logically explains why any country or organization that sustains its rapid growth through plunder will eventually collapse. Resources are finite. You can't always expect your territory to expand by 20% each year indefinitely, because there will come a time when either you have completely annihilated your targets or they successfully resist and stop you plundering. You also shouldn't expect your company to grow indefinitely, because the market share your products capture will one day either become saturated or be reclaimed by your competitors. Once you can no longer plunder or grow, the newly added cancer cells inside that cannot gain more benefits like their predecessors, will cause mutations and collapse the organization. This is the greatest lesson the fall of the Qin dynasty offers to the world. Unfortunately, Nazi Germany and Japan 2000 years later completely failed to grasp this principle, insisting on maintaining their so-called glory of the empire through one war of plunder after another. The subsequent result was, of course, their downfall. Alright, due to time constraints, we will stop at the Qin dynasty for today. In the next episode, I will continue to explore the crazy and stupid events surrounding the fall of other dynasties. As we get closer to modern times, the records will become more detailed. So stay tuned.